CJ Davis, Deputy General Counsel and Head of Sports Business and Legal Affairs at Puma, and also a member of the board of the Sports Lawyers Association. Welcome, CJ.
Hi, Bobby. Thanks for having me.
Oh, really happy to have you here. So I don't think we've had many people from sporting wear brands or lifestyle brands, or I'm not sure how Puma likes to position itself anymore. It's not a
Sports
sneaker
style,
company,
we'll
that's
call
for
it.
sure.
Sports style. Yeah.
So why don't you start, as we normally do, by telling us what exactly your job is, your responsibilities, and although none of our day-to-days are on the regular, what is a day in the life of CJ Davis at Puma?
Yeah. No. So definitely a big question there. We cast a wide net. In terms of the day job, it can change all the time. I mean, my primary role is anything related to Puma's sports business. I'm running point on, so that can mean our global basketball unit sits in the United States, for example. So that can be endorsements, sponsorship, licensing related to that. Our Cobra Puma golf business is located in the U.S. as well. So all the sports related licensing, endorsements, sponsorships, again, connected with that area of the business. And then domestically, some of our North American centered soccer related activities, our F1 and track and field related activities. So basically anything that touches the sports world in the Puma universe, I'm working with. But that's, we always talk about it as a team that it's, we're all generalists in-house working for a company like this and an in-house generally. So I also touch a lot of areas of the business related to IP and sales, even some HR. So it's a wide net for sure in terms of the day-to-day.
Yeah, that's one of those positions where it's hard to get bored because you never know what's going to show up on a given day.
Yeah, which makes it really exciting. I mean, one day I can be working on an athlete deal and a sponsorship deal, and I've got an HR call on a consultant or sales thing. So it can vary all the time, which definitely makes coming in and gives you something to look forward to every day.
Lots of our audience is obviously interested, if they're not already in the legal sports world, they're always interested in how to get in, and everybody's different. Everyone seems to have had a different path to getting in. What was your path to getting to Puma?
Yeah, so I mean, interesting in the sense that I tell my law students this all the time. There's definitely no one path, and I think it takes a lot of uh, being in the right place at the right time, but also putting yourself in the right place for when the right time comes. You're there. So going back to my undergrad, I had always wanted to be involved in sports. At the time, didn't really know what that meant and how to get there, but kind of always evaluated, what the opportunities were. And in my head, that was always working for a team in some context, whether that was operations, legal, whatever it may be. And from undergrad, applied for internships, didn't get a lot of opportunities there. And then moving into law school, I actually had a friend mention to me, and because we're in the Boston area, if I had ever thought of different apparel and sports related companies. And again, never had crossed my mind, but in Boston, you've got Puma, you've got Reebok, you've got Noble, you've got Converse, you've got Saucony, you've got all these footwear and apparel companies that touch sports that really, I don't think come first to mind when it's I want to work in the sports business. So I ended up interning at Puma during law school, and after law school was doing the same thing most do once they graduate and sit for the bar, was interviewing for other positions and other jobs because there wasn't a job for me at the time. And then again, right place at the right time a little bit. Puma ended up acquiring our golf company, Cobra Puma Golf, and that provided an opportunity for me to get in at an entry level. And I've been here. I'm now going on 15 years, so it's been a great run. And I mean, it's allowed a lot of growth, and I think that's what's made it rewarding as well. Starting from an entry level and kind of creating your own opportunities and path as you go along and evolving it into this sports related space. So it was kind of the search for what is working in sports and what does that mean, and kind of branching out from the typical sports context of team, league, media that a lot of people think about first, and looked at this apparel space.
You're bringing up such an interesting point, and one that we've discussed so many times with so many people on this show. And it's really important to highlight, particularly for the law students checking us out. And that is being in the right place at the right time, or as I like to say, serendipity. And you're not going to have that job if you're not putting yourself out there in the community. And you're not going to find that job if all you think about that sports means I work for a league or a team. Because there are so many touch points to being what we generally call a sports lawyer, because after all, sports law is not a discrete area of the law. It's this sort of cornucopia of the law, whereas you've pointed out, on a given day, I might be doing contract work, I might be doing labor and employment work, I might be doing some licensing. It just is different every day.
Yeah, and I think as an example of that too, I mean, product regulations. A lot of people might not think about how the products you wear every day can actually affect sport. But part of my role at Puma is I represent Puma and the broader sporting goods industry on with relations to governing bodies like World Athletics, which governs World Track and Field, the International Olympic Committee, and a big part of that is footwear regulations and different type of product regulations, whether it's shin guards for FIFA or things like that. So it can be product, it can be the contracts. There's all these different areas that touch sport that I don't think a lot of people think about. And even apparel and different things like that traditionally can provide different outlets too. I mean, there was a time Puma was acquired about a decade ago by a company called Kering, which is a luxury conglomerate that owns Gucci and Balenciaga and a lot of these big luxury houses, where I actually went to work for them for a while, 3 years or so. And that provided kind of different experiences that, it's apparel, it connects to sport, but in that world, it also connects to fashion and entertainment. And you see these different areas that all kind of merge. And then I eventually came back to Puma on the sports side. But yeah, there's so many different touch points that I think as law students and younger attorneys, or even more experienced attorneys, you can find different routes in into the sports world through different companies like that.
And you noted in with regards to regulations of governing bodies and footwear, which is something I don't think a lot of people think about. They think about, those are fine looking kicks, I want a pair, or something like that. But within the sports contest, there are rules and regulations that have to be conveyed to wherever you're manufacturing the product to comply with those regulations. And in that regard, that is, do you have any input with the governing bodies when they say the shoe has to be like this, and your designers are saying it's more efficient if we get this? Have you ever had a negotiation like that with the governing bodies?
Yeah, so I think it depends. Certain governing bodies are, very open to a dialogue with, the manufacturers as they're developing different rules and products or product guidelines. World Athletics is a good example of that. If you look at where running shoes have gone over the past decade, 10 years ago, the in thing was, the flat zero drop running shoe, or toe finger shoes where it simulated barefoot running. Now you see these really thick, we call them stack heights in running shoes, and marathon records being broken and sprint records being broken and things like that. So it becomes a dialogue of, the governing body wants to look at the best interest of the sport, but also work with the companies that are, driving, attention to the sport. We're sponsoring athletes in the space and events and things like that. So it depends on the scenario, but a lot of the governing bodies are pretty open to a dialogue. And it's not just track and field. It can be, there's a golf back rollback or golf ball rollback that the USGA, announced about a year or so ago. So there's so many touch points throughout that where you want to have open dialogues, and that's relationship building and things like that.
Yeah, relationships obviously a big part of our business because we're going to deal with the same people, the same organizations over and over again, and you got to figure out how much of that sweet sugar are you going to use versus a little bitter. We're not doing that, so that's a juggling act that we all have to do
Yeah.
in the sort of the transactional sports space. I'd like to call it. But
Yeah.
but one of the things you mentioned, you use the phrase sponsorship, and I'm curious to know, without disclosing obviously any proprietary Puma information, there's a lot of levels of sponsorship that you guys have to be getting involved with. Obviously, it's with individual athletes, it's team branded wear, etc. What's the process of developing those relationships?
Yeah, so I think it starts, primarily with our sports marketing team here at Puma, where we've got different touch points in the sport we're targeting, and it's a conversation between the particular business unit, whether that's a basketball unit or a golf unit or track and field, whatever the case may be, and sports marketing, identifying different athletes in the space, and some of them, and again, I've been here a long time and have relationships with different agents and agencies, and a lot of that even develops through the SLA, where at the annual conference or whatever the case may be, you meet people and come across them. So again, trying to develop those relationships so that it's easy enough to pick up the phone and talk through a deal point, talk through whatever the situation is as we're trying to close in on finalizing the sponsorship. So I think it's a team effort here as we take the different considerations from the business into play, and then pass that on to me on the legal side, along with our marketing teams and product teams who are involved as well.
And I would imagine that investigation, that dive into doing one of those deals, has become significantly different in the era of social media, because part of your due diligence, it would seem, would have to be to see what is this person's presence on social media, A, and B, is it an image that Puma wants to be attached to?
Yeah, and I think you can look at that two ways. I mean, number one, social media, to your point, is so important. What's the following? What's the what segment of the population is following an athlete that can help drive your business from the apparel side? That's one important factor, and the other one you touched on is what's the individual like? What are they into? Are there any concerns that you have to look at and think about on the social media side? And the world has become such a social media driven place that there's a lot of caution, I think, that has to, and awareness that has to go into what's going out there as a representation of your brand. So yeah, definitely an area that we all have to focus on and understand the instant reaction of once something's out there, and are you prepared to react as need be and accordingly to handle those things.
And I would also assume, which of course is always the most dangerous thing for a lawyer to do, assume things. But when you're doing deals, sponsorship deals with individual athletes, for example, are you including, social deliverables for your talent, as opposed to what you might have done 10 years ago? So, for example, if you're signing Joe basketball player and you're going to pay him X much money to wear the shoes, are you also saying, well, you have to do this many stories or Instagram posts, or give us the right to do that, to sort of help market not just the athlete but the products as well?
Yeah, there's definitely usually a social component that you want to go into any of those deals. I mean, on the business side, those are usually things we're negotiating in terms of what type of content may be produced. Again, back 10 plus years ago, it's funny, I was actually looking at an old template the other day for the class I teach, and it was all website focused. And if an athlete has a website and things like that, and I'm like, wow, that aged quickly, because now that's
Sure
all
did.
gone, and it's social media driven and stories and reels, and you're constantly updating. It used to be Facebook would be where the posting would happen, but then now it's Instagram, then it was Snapchat for a bit, and now it's TikTok instead of. So there's all these different kind of areas that you have to keep in mind to evolve over time as where the social impact is and what channels you're interested in attacking. So yeah, we go through all those things and different appearances and where those are valuable, from photo and production shoots to retailer and partner appearances and office appearances and things like that, because we want to be able to make sure we have all those things locked in as well.
And particularly with younger athletes, which would, in my case, be most all current athletes, um, they're more sophisticated, and most of them have grown up in a native digital environment, so they understand the use of all of these um, platforms to deliver the content. Do you find that they're more engaged and more interested now in taking part in the process than an athlete you might have done a deal with 10 years ago?
Yeah, I think so. I think a lot of the younger athletes now, there's a lot of focus on their own brand growing. It's whatever brand sponsoring them, but also how they can grow their own personal brand and have a unique taste in what type of content they want to produce and what fits their personality and things like that. Whereas in the past, I think it was a much more a brand creating the content and saying, hand delivering it to the athlete, saying, here's what you want to roll out. I think over time, that's probably become a little less authentic in a lot of ways for what, especially the younger generation wants to see. So there is more of a collaborative process, I think, on, finding out what interests an athlete we might sponsor and how we can cater that certain content to them or give them the opportunity to kind of have their own creative interests in mind when we're putting something together.
And does that involve connecting your marketing group with the athlete or the agency representing the athlete to sort of create what can be perceived as a more organic representation of the athlete's interest in promoting the product?
Yeah, that's usually, one of the first steps, that can happen even, sometimes it can happen pre-agreement where, an athlete wants to understand, what a different brand can bring to them, how that fits their personality. In our space, there's a lot of different footwear and apparel brands to choose from, and each one has a different maybe thing that they target or are good at or are known for, and that can fit a different athlete's personality in a different way, or maybe they see more opportunity at one brand versus another to kind of to grow that and fit wise. So those discussions can happen beforehand, and then right after a deal is signed, that's usually where you go to work on figuring out the marketing content and starting shoots and things like that to start rolling those things out.
I know we've been mostly talking about individual athletes, but obviously there are team deals where a team is going to be kitted by Puma gear. So those deals have to be a little bit of different negotiation, because it seemed to me that it would not be an uncommon occurrence to run into a situation where Puma is going to kit out the team and yet some of the players have independent apparel deals. How do you maneuver around that?
Yeah, I think in those situations, especially in the US, I think it's much more established, the league sponsorship and how that works. In Europe, in the soccer space, for example, it's still a club by club situation. But in the US, for the past, 20 plus years, all the major sports leagues, the big four at least, have all moved to the league licensed sponsorship. It's funny. I can remember back, I think it was the 2000 Super Bowl. It was the Rams, Titans, and I think both of those teams were actually Puma teams at the time, pre the full league licensing, when that could happen in the U.S. But now that it's moved to a kind of the league licensing format, you understand that as a brand and what an athlete is able to do. They're not going to on the NBA court, it's Nike uniforms, and that's part of the understanding there, and it's finding avenues to utilize and maximize your athletes around that. So Puma shoes, for example, in the NBA are still on court on our athletes, and then finding ways, from the Puma perspective that aren't necessarily on the court to do creative things with them. Again, whether that's through content, whether that's through different types of basketball or golf or whatever footage that we feel can drive interest and promote them. All those different things we try to find balances around.
Now, in the last three and a half, not quite 3.5 years, there are three new letters that have come into all of our lives in the sports world. NIL. Name, image, and likeness. The rights of college players in particular to monetize their name, image, and likeness. And as such, you're able to do deals with college athletes that you might not have been able to do before. Has that changed, or is that different from the way you approach professional athletes in working out sponsorship deals?
Yeah, I think the biggest challenge with it has been is the constant evolution of when NIL first really came to prominence after the Alston case and things like that. The door was open and everyone was kind of wondering from a brand, not even a brand, but just other sponsor type of scenarios. Okay, what does this mean? What avenues are there to utilize or work with collegiate and scholastic athletes, and just staying up to date on everything, I think has been the most challenging part, because you've got, you had NCAA regulations, and then the past different states with all their own different regulations, and universities with their own policies, and high school athletic associations with their own policies. So what sounded initially is, okay, great, this gigantic door is being opened up, turned into a giant patchwork of, okay, well, this person lives in, I'm making this up, Tennessee, but they're going to school in North Carolina. And, what's the Tennessee high school regulation? What's the North Carolina college regulation? What's the specific university regulation? And kind of patching all those things together to see what that's going to look like and what type of deal you can do and things like that. So I think that's been the most challenging part. And honestly, obviously, we continue to see that evolution. And I can't think off the top of my head of a quicker, more rapidly changing area in all my years here than that space. Again, from initial inception a few years ago to the constant changes still happening now, it's something that's, we really have to focus on keeping up with, because we still want to keep in mind the athlete themselves and not put the athlete in a position where it's jeopardizing, a certain eligibility or anything like that. So we try to be really cautious of those things. And then from an actual, usage standpoint, we've got to think about how you're using an athlete in the college space. Most of the major universities have big deals with apparel companies in the space. So you've got to figure out how you can work with athletes and not step on the collegiate apparel deal, whatever that may be. So finding something unique that you can do with an athlete off court or off pitch or off whatever it is, something unique that they bring to the table that kind of transcends a bit just the standard athlete relationship, that can draw uniqueness in the college space and get different eyes, because I think that's a different, sometimes a different person consuming that, that content or whatever it is. So there's a lot of different steps that go into it for sure, and the evolution of it makes it interesting.
Yeah, and as an evolutionary system, as it were, your team has to adapt in different ways, because now there's a layer that's new, the compliance officer generally at the universities, which is a booming growth opportunity for you young lawyers out there. But when you're dealing with a situation where you have 30 odd state rules, and then when you don't have a state rule, you have maybe it's a conference rule, maybe it's a university rule, the due diligence you have to do before you say, Joe, college basketball player, we'd like to sign you up, must be pretty intense to figure out, okay, can we do it? On what terms can we do it? Now we can make the offer. Versus if there was a national system that you knew, anybody you went to, these are the steps. So every state, every college, every conference, it's got to be a different approach.
Yeah, it's constantly, research on what's what, and in some cases you have an experienced agent who may be able to, you may be able to work with on that. Other times, in the NIL space, and you mentioned compliance is an interesting opportunity. A lot of growth in the NIL agent sector I've seen. I mean, there's a lot of opportunities there. So, I mean, some of those agents maybe aren't as experienced and can't help guide down the path as much. So we need to do a lot more checking on our end on, what's compliant, what isn't, and making sure again that we're not putting an athlete in a situation that isn't advantageous to them, and their eligibility as well.
And so I think both for the collegiate athletes that you're signing to NIL deals and the pro athletes, is there a process in determining the talent you want to go after? Has there ever been a situation where some athlete says, "Hey, I've always worn Puma gear and I'd love to get into business with you"? Or is it just an investigation thinking this person matches, the ethos of our business overall?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're always going to get the situation where someone says, I've always worn Puma, I want to be with the brand, things like that, and you evaluate that. But there's there's so many college athletes out there, and you've got to think about how far can you extend yourself as well. So, um, you know, we're usually very focused and trained on what we're gonna, who we're gonna work with, and as a brand, we want to make sure that that individual is, the right fit, and it fits with the brand well. On the professional side, the same things applied for the college side. Individuals, again, like I mentioned before, who have something unique. I don't necessarily know, that can vary as to what that uniqueness is, but something that's fits with the brand. We're also heavily involved in the entertainment space and the lifestyle space. So is there crossover potential with a certain athlete into those other areas that maybe aren't strictly on field, on court, whatever it is? So those are the types of things that we might look for when we're seeing what type of college talent is out there.
And generally speaking, and I brought it up earlier, you just raised it again, lifestyle. Not as It's no longer a sneaker company as we used to say. And you see more and more red carpet. People are
Yeah.
wearing sports shoes. And, your former company or part of your company, Balenciaga, they're making $800, $1,200 sneakers that, if I don't know the difference between them and the ones I buy for $150, but that's another element. So it's not just dealing with athletes. I imagine part of your marketing and endorsement is with entertainment folks and
Yeah, we
certainly
do.
music people.
Yeah, we do a lot of work on the entertainment side. Some of our biggest entertainment ambassadors are Rihanna, ASAP Rocky. We work with a lot of people in that space. I think because from Puma side, we're rooted in performance. We're a brand that's been around for over 70 years, through a number of iconic moments in time, from Tommy Frazier at the Olympics to all these different momentous brand occasions over the years that have us strongly rooted in sport, but also trying to balance that with, again, the world where athleisure is becoming more prominent in the day to day, and what's comfortable for people, and how you can combine sports and fashion into, and what I mentioned at the beginning, we kind of call sports style, this mesh of worlds that can be worn to the office, can be worn walking down the street, but also has the thing that you can play in and be active in. So it's kind of combining all those worlds.
Well, I know that on the rare occasions where once a year I break up my 30-year-old Clyde 2 high top black with red stripe, I get a lot of very positive comments.
Great shoe. The Clyde is one of those classics that it's been there since the beginning. The Puma Suede and the Clyde, some of these iconic silhouettes that kind of transcend. They were could be worn in the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s into today, and it's that's what gives us that kind of heritage that we can fall back on as we do future looking things as well.
Well, CJ, I can't thank you enough for taking the time out of what you have made clear is a very busy schedule you have, in addition to the fact that you teach sports law.
Yes.
So you're a busy guy, but I really appreciate your taking the time and appreciate, your being part of our SLA board. And as a reminder to everybody, if you're not a member of the Sports Lawyers Association, or even if you are, it's an annual renewal. So December 31st, your membership is over. So it's time to renew. So go to sportslaw.org. Up in the top, you can see a little tab that says renew. And if you haven't renewed, just join and become a member. Next week, beginning on Thursday, is our mid-year fall sports symposium. And it should be great. And then CJ's co-chair of our annual conference in Nashville this May.
Yeah, the symposium is going to be great. The conference will be great. So hopefully see as many people out there as possible.
Anyway, that's it for this episode. Thank you, everybody, for joining. CJ, thank you so much. Really appreciate you taking the time. Been great.
Thanks, Bobby. Appreciate it.